The shuttle dropped through the clouds of Kalis 7, and Elena Vasquez pressed her face to the window. Below her, the Vorath Martial Academy spread across the gray moon like a scar. Towers of black stone rose from the ground. Training fields stretched for miles. Warships sat in rows on landing pads, their hulls still scorched from real battles. Everything about this place was built to remind you of one thing. War was the only language the galaxy respected. Elena was 28 years old. She had brown skin, dark hair tied back in a simple knot, and the kind of calm face that people often mistook for emptiness. She was not a soldier. She was a xenobiologist and field medic, sent here as part of a cultural exchange between the Earth Confederacy and the Galactic Concord. Humanity had made first contact less than 40 years ago. In galactic terms, they were still babies, learning to crawl. The exchange program was supposed to help Earth build connections and earn some respect among the older species. Elena was the respect. She did not feel very respected when the shuttle doors opened. The intake hall was enormous. Hundreds of new cadets stood in lines, waiting to be processed. Elena stepped out and immediately felt small. To her left, a group of Vralkin towered over everyone else. They were reptilian, 8 feet tall, covered in thick green scales that could stop a knife. Their mouths were full of teeth that did not need sharpening. To her right, a squad of Thessari clicked and buzzed to each other. They were insectoid, 4-armed, wrapped in natural exoskeleton armor that gleamed under the lights like polished stone. Further ahead, the Dorvani moved in tight groups, wolf-like creatures that walked upright and shared thoughts through a low-level psychic bond. Every species here had been shaped by evolution to kill. Elena had been shaped by evolution to sweat and walk long distances. The processing line moved fast. Each cadet stepped onto a scanning platform where the Academy's central AI, called the Arbiter, measured them. It checked bone density, muscle mass, claw sharpness, venom glands, natural armor, psionic ability, and predatory reflexes. The results determined your classification. A red sash meant warrior candidate. A white sash meant non-combatant. Most cadets got red. When Elena stepped onto the platform, the scan took less than 10 seconds. The Arbiter's voice was flat and mechanical. Species human. Origin Earth, Sol System. Bone density below galactic combat standard. Natural weapons, none detected. Venom, none. Natural armor, none. Psionic resonance, negligible. Predatory reflex index, 14th percentile. Classification, non-combatant. Observer status. A white sash dropped from a slot in the wall. Elena picked it up. Behind her, she heard laughter. She did not turn around. The barracks were divided by classification. Red sashes on the upper floors. White sashes in a small wing near the kitchens, usually occupied by the children of diplomats or journalists, covering the Academy for galactic news feeds. Elena was the only one in her assigned room. She set her bag on the bed and looked around. The walls were bare metal. The mattress was hard. The window looked out onto a training yard where Vralkin cadets were already sparring, their tails crashing against each other like battering rams. She had been on the moon for less than an hour when she met Torvek. He was Vralkin, young, broad, and proud of it. His scales were darker than most, almost black, and he wore his red sash like a crown. He found Elena in the corridor outside the mess hall, standing in line with the other cadets. He looked down at her white sash, then at her, and his lip curled back to show his teeth. His translator made his voice sound bored and cruel at the same time. Elena Vasquez, human, Earth. I know what Earth is, Torvek said. Soft little world, soft little people. He leaned closer. His breath smelled like copper. You are a soft-skinned pet. The Concord sends you here so they can say they included your species. But you do not belong in this place. Elena looked up at him. He was nearly 3 feet taller than her. His arms were thicker than her legs. One swipe of his claws could open her from throat to hip. "Maybe," she said. Then she walked past him into the mess hall. That evening, her liaison officer from Earth's diplomatic corps called her on a secure channel. His name was David Chen, and he looked nervous, which was his usual state. "Listen," he said, "the Academy says you can skip any combat exercises. They'll give you a modified schedule, lectures only. No one expects you to keep up with the cadets physically. We just need you to be there, be visible, and not get hurt. That's the mission." "I understand," Elena said. "Good. Just keep your head down. Earth can't afford an incident." "I understand," she said again. After the call ended, Elena sat on her bed and opened her personal bag. She took out clothes, toiletries, a datapad loaded with xenobiology texts, and a small cloth patch. The patch was faded and stained. It showed a red cross over a broken city skyline, with 2 words stitched beneath it: Jakarta Collapse. The Jakarta Collapse had been Earth's worst urban conflict in 30 years. A city of 12 million people torn apart by war, disease, and failed infrastructure. Elena had been there as a combat medic. She had been 23 years old, crawling through rubble with bullets snapping over her head, stitching wounds by flashlight, while buildings fell around her. She had carried a man twice her size across 4 blocks of open ground with shrapnel in her leg. She had done things she never talked about, and survived things she still dreamed about. The Arbiter had scanned her bones and her skin and her reflexes, and decided she was nothing. It had measured everything about her body, and missed everything about her mind. Elena pinned the Jakarta patch inside her locker, where nobody could see it. Then she closed the locker, turned off the lights, and lay down in the dark. Outside, the Vralken were still sparring. Their roars echoed across the training yard like thunder. Elena listened to them for a long time. She was not scared. She had heard worse sounds than alien roaring. She had heard the sound of a building falling on top of living people. She had heard the silence that comes after. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow the Academy would begin teaching her how aliens fought. She planned to pay very close attention. The galaxy thought she was a soft-skinned pet. The galaxy had not read her file. And Elena Vasquez had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing in any room was not the biggest creature. It was the one that had already decided it was willing to die, and had made peace with that fact before the fight even started. She slept well. She always did, before things got difficult. The first week at Vorath Academy moved fast. Every morning began at what the cadets called the Black Hour, a time before the sun cleared the horizon, when the air was still cold enough to frost on Vralken scales. The cadets lined up in the main yard, breath rising in clouds, and waited for their instructors. Elena stood at the back. She always stood at the back. The white sash on her arm drew looks from every direction. Some cadets stared with confusion, others with open disgust. Most simply looked through her, as if she were a piece of furniture someone had left in the wrong room. The Academy's training program covered 3 areas: combat theory in the lecture halls, physical conditioning on the training fields, and live tactical exercises in the simulation biomes, massive enclosed environments built beneath the moon's surface to recreate different planetary conditions. She sat in the back row, listened carefully, and took notes on her datapad. The lectures covered interstellar combat doctrine, fleet tactics, ground engagement theory, and weapon systems ranging from plasma lances to orbital bombardment arrays. The instructors were all veterans. They spoke with the hard confidence of people who had watched others die and had decided that the best way to honor the dead was to make sure fewer people joined them. Elena absorbed everything. She did not raise her hand. She did not ask questions. She wrote things down, and she thought about them later, alone in her room, turning each idea over in her mind like a stone she was checking for cracks. On the training fields, things were different. Physical conditioning was built for species that could bench press ground vehicles and sprint at 60 kilometers per hour. Elena could do neither. In strength exercises, she finished last. In speed drills, she finished near the bottom. The Vrulkin threw boulders across the yard. The Thessari climbed vertical walls with their 4 arms, fast as spiders. The Dorvani ran obstacle courses in coordinated packs, their psychic bond letting them move like a single animal with 12 legs. Elena jogged. She ran at a steady, unremarkable pace. She did not stop. In the endurance drills, something small happened. The drill was simple. Run laps around the outer track until you could not run anymore. One by one, the cadets dropped. The Vrulkin, huge and powerful, burned through their energy fast. Their cold-blooded bodies overheated under sustained effort. The Thessari lasted longer, but their exoskeletons were heavy, and their joints were not designed for repetitive motion over long periods. The Dorvani did well, but eventually their pack coordination broke down as individuals tired at different rates. Elena finished in the middle of the pack, not first, not close to first, but she was still running when cadets twice her size had stopped. A few of them noticed. Most did not care. Endurance was not a respected trait at Vorath. Strength was respected. Speed was respected. The ability to keep moving when your body screamed at you to stop was considered a curiosity, not an advantage. The most interesting thing Elena did, and the thing that confused the other cadets the most, was watch. She watched everything. During sparring matches, she sat on the sideline and studied how each species fought. She noted how the Vrulkin favored their right side when they charged. She saw how the Thessari always protected their lower left arm, which was slightly shorter than the other 3. She observed that the Dorvani became disoriented when separated from their packmates by more than 20 meters. She wrote it all down. A Thessari cadet named Kiren was the first to ask about it. Kiren was unusual among the insectoid cadets. She was curious about other species in a way that went beyond sizing them up for combat. She found Elena sitting alone in the mess hall one evening, datapad open, replaying footage of the day's sparring sessions. "You watch more than you train," Kiren said, settling her forearms on the table. Her compound eyes reflected the light in shifting patterns. "Why? Watching does not build muscle." Elena looked up. "Where I come from," she said, "the ones who survive are not always the strongest. They are the ones who paid attention." Kiren tilted her head, a gesture that meant she was thinking. "And what have you learned from paying attention?" Elena smiled slightly. "That everyone here fights the way their body tells them to fight. Nobody fights the way the situation tells them to fight." Kiren did not fully understand what that meant. She would later. 3 weeks into the semester, Warden Sovrek announced a live tactical exercise. Sovrek was the Academy's senior combat instructor, a Vrulkin veteran with scars across half his face and one eye replaced by a glowing red prosthetic. He spoke in short, hard sentences, and he never repeated himself. The exercise was a squad-based survival scenario in Biome 4, a jungle simulation with thick vegetation, limited visibility, and automated combat drones patrolling set routes. Each squad had to cross 2 kilometers of hostile jungle, reach a signal beacon, and activate it. Squads that lost more than half their members to drone fire were eliminated. Sovrek assigned the squads himself. He put Elena with 4 cadets who had been performing poorly, 2 young Dorvani who panicked under pressure, a Thessari with a damaged foreleg, and a Vrulkin who was strong but slow. It was obvious to everyone that Sovrek was giving Elena a handicap squad. It was, in its way, a small cruelty designed to remind the human that observer status existed for a reason. They entered the biome, and within 10 minutes everything went wrong. The drones hit them from above, breaking through the canopy with plasma bolts that scorched the ground black. The two Dorvani froze. The Vralkin roared and charged blindly. The injured Thessary dropped flat and covered her head. Elena did not freeze. She did not roar. She grabbed the nearest Dorvani by the arm and pulled him sideways into a drainage gully she had spotted 30 seconds after entering the biome. She shouted for the others to follow. Her voice was not loud, but it was steady, and in the middle of chaos, steadiness was the thing people followed. They followed. In the gully, Elena worked fast. She checked the injured Thessary and found a plasma burn on her damaged foreleg. She treated it with supplies from her medkit, her hands quick and sure, the same hands that had stitched wounds in the ruins of Jakarta. While she worked, she watched the drones overhead. She counted their passes. She timed the gaps between them. They patrol in a figure-8 pattern, she told the squad. Every 90 seconds there is a window of about 12 seconds where this section of jungle is uncovered. We move during those windows. Short bursts, cover to cover. Nobody runs ahead, and nobody falls behind. The Vralkin stared at her. "You are a medic," he said. "You do not give orders." "You charged a drone and almost lost your head," Elena replied calmly. "I am keeping my head. Follow me or do not. Your choice." He followed. They crossed the jungle in 47 minutes using Elena's method. Short, controlled movements during the gaps. Elena led from the front, navigating through vegetation she had studied in her xenobiology texts, avoiding plants she knew were toxic, choosing paths that provided natural cover. When they reached the beacon, she activated it without ceremony. Of the 20 squads that entered Biome 4 that day, only 3 completed the objective with all members intact. Elena's squad was one of them. Warden Sovrek reviewed the exercise footage that evening in his private office. He watched Elena pull the Dorvani into the gully. He watched her treat the wound while simultaneously counting drone patrol cycles. He watched her lead a squad of strangers through a combat zone using nothing but observation, calm thinking, and the quiet refusal to panic. He did not say anything about it publicly. But the next day, he did not reassign her squad. 1 week later, the Academy posted an announcement on every display screen in the barracks. The semester's final evaluation would be the Kill Trial, a legendary solo survival exercise on the surface of a death world. The trial had a history of serious injuries and occasional fatalities. Non-combatants were automatically exempt. Elena walked to the registration terminal and entered her name. The arbiter flagged her entry immediately. A warning flashed on the screen. Candidate classification, non-combatant. Participation in kill trial is inadvisable. Probability of serious injury or death, high. Confirm entry? Elena pressed confirm. She signed the liability waiver. She turned away from the terminal and walked back to her room. In the monitoring office, the registration officer, a tired Dorvani administrator who had processed 1,000 entries over the years, stared at the screen. He had never seen a non-combatant volunteer for the kill trial. He flagged it for Warden Sovrek's attention and went back to his work, shaking his head. In her room, Elena opened her locker and looked at the Jakarta patch. She touched it once with her fingertip. Then she closed the locker and began packing her field kit. She packed light. She always packed light. The less you carried, the longer you could keep moving. And Elena Vasquez had learned that the secret to surviving anything was very simple. You just had to keep moving longer than the thing that was trying to kill you. The drop pods fell through the atmosphere of Ret Sahara like burning seeds. 32 of them, each carrying a single cadet, each aimed at a different zone on the moon's surface. The pods hit the ground hard enough to crack rock, and then their doors blew open, letting in the heat and the dust and the smell of a world that did not want anything living on it. Elena's pod landed in a rocky valley between two ridges of black volcanic stone. She stepped out and felt the heat hit her like a wall. The air was dry, thin, and carried a faint chemical sting that told her the soil was high in sulfur compounds. The sky was a sick orange color. In the distance, she could see geysers of steam bursting from cracks in the ground. The sun, too large and too close, hung on the horizon like an open wound. She had been given the same starting kit as every other cadet, a basic survival pack with water purification tablets, 3 days of compressed rations, a medical kit, a navigation unit, and a short utility knife. No weapons, no armor, no communication equipment except an emergency extraction beacon that could be triggered once, ending the trial for whoever used it. The objective was clear: survive 5 planetary rotations, roughly 7 standard days, kill at least 1 Gorax, reach the extraction point under your own power. The Gorax were massive predator beasts bred specifically for the trial. They stood 3 meters tall at the shoulder, covered in overlapping plates of bone armor, with jaws strong enough to crush stone. They were fast over short distances. They were territorial. They were very, very hard to kill. Most cadets began hunting immediately. The Academy's monitoring fiends showed Vulcan cadets charging into the wilderness, roaring challenges. The Sari cadets set ambush points and waited with their natural bladed forearms ready. Dorvani cadets spread out in wide tracking patterns, using their psychic senses to locate prey. Elena did not hunt. She sat down on a rock, drank a small amount of water, and looked around. For the entire first day, she walked the valley. She moved slowly and carefully, mapping the terrain in her head. She found 2 reliable water sources, a spring fed by underground channels, and a collection pool beneath a rock overhang where condensation gathered at night. She identified which plants were toxic by cross-referencing their appearance with species she had studied in her xenobiology courses. She found 3 that were edible, or at least would not kill her. She noted the locations of natural shelter, narrow canyons where the wind could not reach, caves in the ridge walls, and overhangs that would block the worst of the sun. On the second day, she built. Using her utility knife and materials from the environment, she made a fire-hardened spear. She selected a straight branch from a plant with dense, heavy wood. She sharpened one end with the knife and then held it over a fire she built from dried vegetation, rotating it slowly until the tip was blackened and hard as stone. She braided plant fibers into cordage. She set snares for small creatures to supplement her rations. She built a simple shelter that kept the sun off her during the hottest hours. Back at the academy, the monitoring room was staffed around the clock. Wardens and technicians watched feeds from every cadet's body camera and environmental sensors. The screens showing Vulcan cadets smashing through undergrowth and fighting Gorax head-on drew the most attention. The screen showing Elena weaving plant fiber into rope drew none. A technician glanced at her feed and muttered to a colleague, "The human is making string." On the morning of the 3rd day, Elena found tracks. Large tracks, deep enough to crack the baked earth, with the distinctive 3-toed pattern of a Gorax. She knelt beside them and studied them for a long time. She measured the depth of the impressions, the distance between steps, the way the soil was disturbed at the edges. She could read the weight, the speed, and the direction of the animal from its footprints alone. This was not magic. This was a skill that humans had practiced for 200,000 years, since the first hunters on the African plains had followed antelope tracks through grass taller than their heads. She began to follow. She did not run. She jogged at a steady, sustainable pace, following the tracks through the valley and up into the rocky hills. When the tracks crossed hard stone, where prints did not show, she looked for other signs. Scratches on rock, disturbed gravel, broken plant stems. She found them all. The Gorax was large, and it did not bother to hide its passage. Nothing on this moon was supposed to be able to threaten it. By midday, she saw it for the first time. It was resting in the shade of a cliff face, half a kilometer ahead. It was enormous. Its bone plates were the color of dried blood, and they overlapped like the scales of some ancient dragon. Its head was broad and flat, with small dark eyes and a mouth that could swallow her whole. Even lying down, it was taller than she was. Elena stopped. She sat on a rock, drank water, ate a small amount of food, and watched the Gorax through the heat shimmer. She did not approach. She watched how it breathed. She watched how it shifted its weight when it moved. She watched it scratch the side of its neck against the cliff face, and she saw the way the bone plates separated slightly at the joint, revealing a gap of exposed tissue about the width of her fist. Then, she stood up and began jogging toward it. The Gorax heard her when she was 200 meters away. It rose to its feet, turned, and saw her. For a moment, it seemed confused. This small, soft creature was approaching it in the open, in daylight, without any apparent weapon or advantage. The Gorax snorted, turned, and walked away. Elena followed. The Gorax walked faster. Elena jogged. The Gorax broke into a run, covering ground in massive strides that shook the earth. Elena could not match its speed. She did not try. She kept jogging at the same steady pace, following the tracks, following the dust cloud, following the direction of travel. An hour passed. The Gorax stopped and rested. Elena kept coming. The Gorax ran again. Elena kept coming. The sun moved across the orange sky, and the shadows grew long, and Elena kept moving, one foot in front of the other, breathing steady, heart rate controlled, sweat pouring off her skin and evaporating in the dry air. This was the thing the galaxy did not understand about humans. This was the thing the Arbiter's scanners could never measure. Humans were not fast, they were not strong, they were not armored or venomous or psychic. But 200,000 years ago, on a hot planet orbiting a yellow star, human beings had learned to do something that almost no other predator in the known galaxy could do. They could run for hours without stopping. They could sweat to cool their bodies while their prey overheated. They could track an animal across an entire landscape, never catching it, never falling behind, until the animal's legs gave out and its heart failed from exhaustion. And it was the oldest trick humanity had ever learned. By nightfall of the third day, Elena had been following the Gorax for 9 hours. She made camp, slept 4 hours, and resumed at first light. On the fourth day, the Gorax began to slow. It was not built for sustained flight. It was an ambush predator, designed for short explosive charges and devastating strikes. Its bone armor was heavy. Its body generated enormous heat during exertion, and it had no efficient way to shed that heat over long periods. It stopped more frequently. It breathed harder. Its movements became unsteady. Elena kept jogging. In the monitoring room at the academy, the technicians had stopped watching the Vralkin feeds. They were all staring at Elena's screen. Warden Sovrek stood behind them, with his arms crossed. His single red eye fixed on the image of the small human woman, jogging through a wasteland behind a creature that outweighed her by a factor of 20. "What is she doing?" a technician whispered. Sovrek did not answer immediately. Then he said, very quietly, "She is doing what her species was built to do." On the fifth day, the Gorax could barely walk. It stumbled across a flat stretch of cracked earth, its legs trembling, its mouth hanging open, its body radiating heat like a furnace. Elena was 200 meters behind it. She was exhausted. Her feet were blistered. Her lips were cracked. She had rationed her water down to sips, and her body ached from 4 days of constant movement across hostile terrain. But she was still moving, and the Gorax was not. She had spent 2 days studying the terrain before she ever began the pursuit. She knew where the valley narrowed into a ravine, a place where the rock walls closed in tight enough that the Gorax could not turn around easily. She had been steering it toward that ravine since the morning of the fourth day, adjusting her approach angle, pushing it gently in the direction she wanted, the way a sheepdog guides a flock. The Gorax stumbled into the ravine. The walls closed in. It turned, confused, overheated, its legs shaking, and faced her. Elena walked forward with the spear in her hand. The Gorax lunged. It was slow now, a shadow of the explosive predator it had been 3 days ago. Elena sidestepped. The creature crashed into the ravine wall, its bone plates scraping against rock. It staggered. Its neck twisted, and the gap in its armor, the gap she had spotted on day 3, opened wide. Elena drove the fire-hardened spear into the gap with both hands and all the weight of her exhausted body behind it. The Gorax made a sound she would never forget. Then it fell. The ground shook when it hit. Dust rose around them both like a cloud. Elena collapsed beside it. She lay on the hot ground, breathing in ragged gasps, her hands bloody, her body broken and burning and alive. She reached for the extraction beacon on her belt, pressed the button, and let her hand fall. In the monitoring room, no one spoke. On the screen, a small human woman lay in the dust beside a dead monster, and the only weapon in the frame was a pointed stick. Warden Sovrek stared at the screen for a long time. Then he reached out and replayed the footage from day 3, the moment Elena had watched the Gorax scratch its neck. 3 days before she used it. He said something in Vralkin. The translator rendered it into simple words that filled the silent room. It was never the body. It was the mind. The medical ward at Vorath Academy smelled like disinfectant and copper. Elena lay on a bed designed for someone 3 times her size, her feet barely reaching halfway down the mattress. Her hands were bandaged. Her feet were wrapped in healing patches that tingled as they worked on the blisters. A nutrient drip fed into her arm, replacing everything her body had burned through in 5 days on Reth Sahara. She had been back at the academy for 6 hours. She had slept for 4 of them. Now she was awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of alien medical equipment and the distant sound of cadets in the corridors outside. The door opened, and Kiren walked in. The Thessari moved quietly for someone with 4 arms and an exoskeleton. She pulled a chair next to the bed and sat down, her compound eyes studying Elena with an expression that was hard to read, but felt like concern. "You look terrible," Kiren said. "But I am alive." "Yes," Kiren said. "You are. That is the part everyone is talking about." Elena had expected some reaction. She had not expected the scale of it. In the hours since her extraction, the footage of her kill trial had been reviewed by every warden at the academy. It had been shared among the cadets through unofficial channels. It had reached the administrative offices of the Galactic Concord's military division. A human non-combatant had killed a Gorax with a wooden spear after a 4-day pursuit, and nobody knew what to do with that information. The High Council of Wardens met that afternoon in the stone chamber beneath the Academy's central tower. The council consisted of 12 senior instructors, each representing a different species and combat tradition. They sat in a semicircle of carved seats, their faces lit by the glow of a holographic display that showed Elena's trial footage on a loop. The debate began immediately, and it was not polite. Warden Dreth, a Thessari weapons specialist, spoke first. She did not fight. She walked behind an animal until it fell down. This is not combat. This is patience. The kill trial measures a cadet's ability to engage and destroy a hostile target through martial skill. She used no martial skill. "She used a spear," said Warden Null, a Dorvani tactician. "That qualifies as a weapon." "A stick," Dreth corrected. "She sharpened a stick. My hatchlings sharpen sticks. It is not a weapon, it is a toy." "The Gorax is dead," said Warden Sovrek from the end of the row. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. The trial requires one thing: kill the target. The rules say nothing about how. The rules assume the cadet will engage in combat. She avoided combat entirely. She ran away from the creature for 4 days. She ran toward it, Sovrek said. That is the part you are not seeing. He stood and walked to the holographic display. He pulled up Elena's movements over the full 5 days, rendered as a glowing trail across the terrain map. Day 1 and 2, she prepared. She mapped terrain, secured water and food, built tools. She did not move on the target until she was ready. Day 3, she located the Gorax and began pursuit. She did not attack. She followed, she studied. She identified a weakness in its armor plating that no scanner in our system had flagged, because no one had ever needed to find it before. Then she spent the next 2 days herding the target toward terrain she had already scouted, a narrow ravine where the creature's size would become a disadvantage. He traced the path on the map with one clawed finger. Look at the pursuit route. It is not random. She adjusted her angle of approach 17 times over 2 days to push the Gorax northwest toward the ravine. She was steering it. A creature 4 times her mass, faster, stronger, armored, and she moved it exactly where she wanted it to go without it ever realizing what was happening. The chamber was quiet. She did not fight a battle, Sovrek said. She fought a campaign. She conducted reconnaissance, gathered intelligence, identified a vulnerability, chose her battlefield, and then executed a plan that was 3 days in the making. She won before she ever raised the spear. This is not the absence of martial skill. This is martial skill so far beyond what we expected that our systems had no way to recognize it. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 8 of the 12 wardens voted to reclassify Elena from non-combatant to full warrior candidate. The arbiter, the Academy's classification AI, was forced to create a new sub-designation that had never existed before in its database. The old file read, Non-Combatant, Observer Status. The new file read, Warrior Candidate, Adaptive Threat, Strategic Predator. The white sash was removed from Elena's record. A red sash was issued. When a junior administrator brought it to her in the medical ward, Elena held it in her bandaged hands and looked at it for a long time without speaking. The reaction among the cadets was divided. Some respected what she had done. They had watched the footage and they understood, on some level, that what they had seen was not weakness dressed up as victory. It was something else entirely, something they had no word for. Others were angry. Torvik was the angriest. He found Elena 3 days later, when she was well enough to walk the corridors again. She was moving slowly, still sore, but upright. He stepped in front of her, in a hallway near the barracks, blocking her path. He was enormous. His black scales seemed to absorb the light. His red sash hung from his shoulder like a flag. He had failed the kill trial. His Gorax had broken his arm and 3 of his ribs before the emergency extraction pulled him out. He had been in the medical ward longer than Elena. "You do not deserve that sash," he said. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You did not fight. You did not bleed in combat. You ran and you hid and you poked a dying animal with a stick. You are a fraud, and everyone knows it." Elena looked up at him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was almost twice her height. His claws could cut through metal. He was shaking with anger and wounded pride and something deeper than both that he probably did not have a name for. "You are right that I am not like you," she said. Her voice was even, not cold, not aggressive, just steady. "You saw your Gorax and you attacked it the moment it was in front of you. That is what your instincts told you to do. It is what your body was built for. And it broke your arm and your ribs and almost killed you." She paused. Torvik said nothing. "I spent 3 days learning how to make sure mine could not win," Elena continued. "I watched it. I learned how it moved, where it was weak, where the ground would help me and hurt it. By the time I raised my spear, the fight was already over. The Gorax just did not know it yet. She took a small step closer, not aggressive, not afraid, just closer. "That is not fraud," she said. "That is patience, and where I come from, patience is what separates the living from the dead." Torvek stared at her. His claws flexed at his sides. His jaw was tight. For a long moment, Elena thought he might hit her. She had already decided what she would do if he did. Which angles to move, which direction to fall, how to protect her head. She had made that calculation in the first second of the confrontation, the way she made every calculation, quietly and completely, before anyone noticed she was thinking at all. But Torvek did not hit her. Something shifted in his eyes. It was not respect, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might eventually become respect, if given enough time. It was the realization that the small creature standing in front of him was not afraid of him, had never been afraid of him, and that this fact, more than the dead Gorax, more than the red sash, was the thing that truly unsettled him. He stepped aside, without a word. Elena walked past him, and continued down the corridor. That night, Kiran found Elena in the medical ward, sitting on the edge of her old bed, re-bandaging her own hands. The healing patches were good, but Elena preferred to do her own wound care. Old habits. Kiran sat beside her, and was quiet for a while. Then she asked the question she had been carrying for weeks. "The patch in your locker. Jakarta collapse. I looked it up on the Galactic Information Network. There was very little about it. Just that it was a human conflict. A bad one." Elena wound the bandage around her palm slowly. She did not look up. "It was a city," she said. 12 million people. It fell apart. War, disease, broken infrastructure. Everything went wrong at the same time, and nothing got fixed fast enough. I was a combat medic. I was 23. She tied off the bandage and flexed her fingers. "I spent 9 months in that city. I carried wounded people through streets where the buildings were falling down. I performed surgery in basements with no electricity. I watched people die because I could not get to them fast enough. And I watched people live because I refused to stop trying." She looked at Kiran. The Thesauri's compound eyes caught the light and held it. "You asked me once why I watch everything," Elena said. "Why I take notes and study and plan, instead of fighting the way everyone else does. Jakarta is why. Because I learned there that the universe does not care how strong you are, or how fast you are, or how sharp your claws are. It kills everyone the same way, and the only people who walk out of the fire are the ones who paid attention, who adapted, and who absolutely refused to lie down." Kiran was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Your species frightens me a little, Elena." Elena smiled. It was a tired smile, a kind smile, the smile of someone who understood exactly why that was a reasonable thing to feel. "Good," she said. "That means you are paying attention." The report landed on the desk of senior analyst Morvi Keth 3 days after Elena Vasquez received her red sash. Morvi worked for the Galactic Concord's Intelligence Division, a quiet office on a quiet station where quiet people spent their days reading about dangerous things so that louder people did not have to. The report was flagged as routine. A cadet at Vorath Academy had completed the kill trial using unconventional methods. It happened occasionally. A Thesauri would use chemical traps. A Dorvani would dig a pit. The methods were noted, filed, and forgotten. Morvi almost filed this one too. Then he watched the footage. He watched it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and stared at the wall for a long time. Then he pulled up every file the Galactic Concord had on species 7012, commonly known as humans. Origin planet Earth, Sol system. He read for 6 hours. When he was done, he was no longer sitting back in his chair. He was leaning forward with his hands pressed flat on the desk, as if bracing for impact. The file on humanity was thin. Earth had been part of the galactic community for less than 40 years. Initial assessments had classified humans as Tier 4, which meant non-threatening. The classification was based on standard metrics. Humans had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no psionics. Their homeworld was small, their population modest by galactic standards, their military technology generations behind the older species. They were considered a diplomatic curiosity, friendly, talkative, and harmless. Morvi began cross-referencing the human file with data from Earth's own historical archives, which had been shared with the Concord as part of the cultural exchange program. He suspected nobody had read them carefully. He was right. What he found changed the shape of his evening. Before they built cities, before they invented writing, before they split the atom, they had survived by chasing animals across open plains until those animals collapse from heat exhaustion. They had done this for hundreds of thousands of years. It was not a tactic. It was the foundation of their entire species. They had survived ice ages, not one ice age, several. Their planet had frozen and thawed and frozen again, and each time the humans had adapted. They had built shelters, made clothing from animal skins, mastered fire, and kept going. Other species on their world had gone extinct. The humans had not. They had survived supervolcanic eruptions that had choked their atmosphere with ash and dropped their population to fewer than 10,000 individuals. 10,000 on a planet that was actively trying to kill them. And from those 10,000, they had rebuilt. They waged wars. This was not unusual among sentient species. What was unusual was the scale. Humans had fought industrial wars. Wars involving millions of combatants. Wars that consumed entire continents for years. They had developed chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons. They had created devices capable of rendering their own planet uninhabitable. And then they had pointed those devices at each other, and spent decades in a state of mutual threat that they called, with a dark humor Morvi found deeply unsettling, mutual assured destruction. And they had not destroyed themselves. They had come close, but they had not done it. This was the detail that stayed with Morvi long after he closed the file. Not the wars, not the weapons. The fact that humans had held the power to end their own existence and had chosen, through some combination of fear and wisdom and stubbornness, not to use it. That required a kind of discipline that Morvi had not expected from a Tier 4 species. He filed a request with his supervisor for a full intelligence review of Species 7012. His supervisor read the request, read the attached summary, and approved it within the hour. At the academy, the atmosphere around Elena had changed. It was not warmth, it was not friendship. It was something colder and more complicated. The cadets who had mocked her or ignored her now watched her the way prey animals watch a shadow they cannot identify. They did not know what she was, but they had seen what she could do, and the gap between those two things made them nervous. Torvek avoided her, not out of hatred anymore, but out of something quieter. He had rewatched her kill trial footage in his quarters, alone, 3 times. Each time he noticed something new. The way she had mapped the terrain before she moved. The way she had rationed her resources to last exactly as long as she needed them. The way she had steered a creature that outweighed her by thousands of kilograms into a trap it never recognized. He was beginning to understand that what Elena had done was not a trick. It was a way of thinking. And it was a way of thinking that his species did not have. The semester's graduation ceremony was held in the Academy's Great Hall, a cavernous space carved from the black stone of Kawis 7. The graduating cadets stood in rows, their red sashes bright against their uniforms and scales and exoskeletons. Dignitaries from a dozen species filled the observation balconies. Flags of the Galactic Concord hung from the ceiling. Elena stood in the front row. She was the smallest person on the stage by a significant margin. She wore her red sash the same way she wore everything, simply, without decoration, without display. Her hands were still healing. Her feet were still tender. She stood straight, anyway. Warden Sovrek addressed the graduates from the central podium. He spoke about duty, about the weight of the warrior's path, about the responsibility that came with the skills they had earned. It was a speech he had given many times, and he delivered it with the practiced gravity of a soldier who meant every word. Then he paused. He looked at Elena. In the silence of the great hall, 500 beings watched a scarred Vralkin veteran turn his one good eye toward a human woman who weighed less than his arm. "When you arrived," he said, speaking directly to her, but loud enough for the hall to hear, "the Arbiter classified you as non-combatant. It measured your body and found no claws, no armor, no venom. By every standard we use to assess combat potential, you were nothing." Elena met his gaze without blinking. But the Arbiter was built to assess predators. It was built to measure the weapons that species carry in their bodies. It looks for fangs. It looks for strength. It looks for the things that make a creature dangerous in the moment of contact. He paused. It was not built to assess humans. The hall was completely silent. Because humans are not dangerous in the moment of contact. They are dangerous in every moment before it. They watch, they learn, they plan, they adapt. They build tools from nothing and strategies from observation, and they do not stop, ever. The kill trial was designed for predators. Elena Vasquez completed it not as a predator, but as something the designers never imagined. Something that does not need natural weapons, because it builds better ones. Something that does not need armor, because it will find your weakness before you can use your strength. Something that does not need speed, because it will outlast you no matter how fast you run. He looked back at the assembled graduates. Remember this, all of you. The galaxy is full of dangerous species. Today you have seen that the most dangerous one does not look dangerous at all. After the ceremony, Elena stood outside the Great Hall in the cold air of Kalis 7, watching the ships come and go from the landing pads. Kiren found her there. "What will you do now?" the Thessari asked. "Go home," Elena said. "Report to my government. Tell them what I learned here." "And what did you learn?" Elena considered the question. That the galaxy measures everything the wrong way. And that my people need to be here. Not as observers, not as curiosities, as participants. Kiren tilted her head. "You sound like you are planning another campaign." Elena smiled. "I am always planning a campaign, Kiren. That is the human condition." They stood together for a moment, the Thessari and the human, looking up at a sky full of stars that belonged to species older and stronger, better armed than humanity. Then Kiren returned to the barracks, and Elena walked to the transport that would carry her back to Earth's diplomatic station. Her liaison officer, David Chen, was waiting for her in the departure lounge. He looked relieved to see her alive, which she found funny. He had been worried the entire time. She could tell because he had lost weight. "How was it?" he asked. Elena reached into her bag and took out 2 folded pieces of cloth. One was white, one was red. She placed them both on the table between them. "Tell command to send more of us," she said. "Not observers, not diplomats, soldiers, scientists, engineers, people who can learn and adapt and do what I did. And tell them to stop letting the galaxy decide what we are. We will show them ourselves." David picked up the red sash and turned it over in his hands. "What are we going to show them?" "That we are not what they measured," Elena said, "and that we never were." She left the lounge and boarded her transport. Through the window she watched the moon of Kalis 7 shrink behind her, the black towers of the Academy fading into the gray landscape until they were just shadows, and then nothing. In the Academy's database, her file had been updated one final time. Warden Sovrek had added a note, flagged for distribution to the Galactic Concord's military intelligence network. It read, "Recommend immediate reclassification of Species 7012, designation Human, from Tier 4 Non-Threat to Tier 1 Apex. All prior assessments based on biological metrics are insufficient and should be considered invalid. This species does not conform to standard predatory models. They possess no natural weapons, yet they are weapon makers. They possess no natural armor, yet they are survivors of a death-class homeworld. They are slower than most combat species, yet they will follow you until your body fails. They are weaker than most combat species, yet they will find the one weakness you did not know you had. Reassessment of all prior assumptions is advised with the highest urgency. They are patient, they adapt, and they do not stop." Below the note, the Arbiter had assigned its new classification. The words glowed on the screen, in the quiet of an empty office, long after the last administrator had gone home. Species 7012, Human. Adaptive Threat. Strategic Predator. Tier 1 Apex. The galaxy had finally measured them correctly. And somewhere on a transport ship heading home, Elena Vasquez closed her eyes and slept the way she always did before the next hard thing began. Peacefully, because she had already started planning.